Awesome. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maya Goodwin, and I'm the acting designated federal official for the Department of Energy's 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board. Welcome, everyone, to today's meeting. I once again want to remind you all that this meeting is being recorded. I would also like to introduce the chair of the Energy Workforce Advisory Board, Missy Henriksen. Thanks to you and all our members for your continued service and dedication to this advisory board. I'm excited to also warmly welcome the members of the board. So regarding the meeting's operations, we have an exciting agenda today, and our chair will go over the content of that in our meeting. Please note that we will do our best to stick to the times outlined in the agenda. We will be tracking time for each section of the meeting, and we'll let the group know when time is almost up. Most of the meeting is focused on discussion, though, so we can be somewhat flexible. Copies of all meeting materials and public comments will be available on the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board website. I would like to add that only members of the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board and certain members of DOE may ask questions of presenters. You will notice that according to the FACA, which is the act governing this board, we will maintain a public comment period, which will take place at 4:10 p.m. For members of the public requesting time to make a public comment, please limit your remarks to no more than 3 minutes, and we will have to stick to time on that. For those public commenters that have not pre-registered, please send an email to me at EWAB at, oops. There we go. At ewab@hq.doe.gov. Again, that's ewab@hq.doe.gov. If you would like to speak during the public comment window and have not yet, let us know. If there are any members of the press, we welcome you. If you have any questions of our speakers, please contact them directly. For questions for DOE staff, please reach out to me via email outside of the meeting. Now I'd like to mention the EAC meeting minutes. Per that FACA Act, a summary of this meeting will be prepared and made available within 90 days of this meeting. The summary will include a description of the matters discussed and any conclusions reached by the committee. As I noted earlier, in order to maintain an accurate summary, this meeting is being audio and video recorded. Now I will take roll call. When I call your name, please repeat your name and organization. Dr. Diana Ahmed. Oh, I believe she said she'd be a little late. Amanda Cage.
Amanda Cage, CEO of the National Fund for Workforce Solutions.
Maureen Conway.
Maureen Conway, Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program at the Aspen Institute.
Becky Irvin. Sarita Gupta.
Sarita Gupta, Vice President of U.S. Programs at the Ford Foundation.
Missy Henriksen.
Missy Henriksen, the Executive Director for the Center for Energy Workforce Development.
Chris Levesque. Chris,
you didn't unmute.
we can't hear you, but there's no rule about that, I think. Dr. Tom Krieger. Dr. Dan Marshall.
Dan Marshall, Research Professor, George Washington Institute of Public Policy.
Dr. Gerard Melanson.
Gerard Melanson for the National Green Jobs Advisory Council.
A7.
A7, Nez Perce Tribe.
Dr. Jermaine Worrell. Allison Ziogas.
Allison Ziogas, Head of Labor Relations for Orsted Americas, Inc.
Dr. Tom Krieger. I saw you just jumped on.
Yes, Tom Krieger, Director of Research and Education for NAB2. Thank you.
Great. Thanks everyone for your participation and your ongoing service to the department and the country. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. And with that, Madam Chair, I convene this meeting of the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board.
Thank you, Maya, for doing such a great job in teeing everything up today. Thank you to members of the EWAB board who are here with us today, our contractors and guests who have elected to spend time with us to influence the development of our first work paper on behalf of the 21st Century Energy Workforce Advisory Board. As Maya alluded, we have a very robust agenda for today, lots of areas of discussion as we inch closer to the finalization of that first paper. We will hear first from Pam Egan, who will give us an update on how it's going with the report writing, continuing to take the best ideas, the best actionable recommendations from the group and turning that into what hits the final page count for getting the paper developed. We will also spend some time in discussion on really what are DOE's unique, what's the comparative advantage, the unique position that the department has in supporting workforce development. We will spend some time talking about what's not included in the paper. Again, we know from the work that we've undertaken over the past many months, there are so many different ways we could take the direction of the paper. So we want to ensure and give ourselves a pulse check on what's not here that we want to surface before we begin to go pencils down on this work product. And with that, it will start to ease into what's coming next for us as a board, what we can start looking at once this paper is published and how we can continue to make sure that we are giving advice, guidance, thoughts, and recommendations to the department. And then we will move into public comment period, as Maya alluded, welcoming comments from any of our guests who are in attendance. And then we will adjourn ourselves today prior to getting together again in just about a month's time. So that's a look at the agenda that will guide us for the next hour and a half. One other thing I'd like to address before we turn the microphone over to Pam and her team for an update on the development of the paper is I would like to acknowledge Anne McGonigal's resignation from the board. While that is unfortunate news for the board, there's also a silver lining to this. The good news is that Anne is actually going to be a senior analyst who will be working with this team, leading stakeholder engagement for the Office of Energy Jobs. So she has not gone far, though she will not be serving as an official member of this board. We will continue to have the opportunity to work with Anne and her team. So very grateful for her service and looking forward to working with her in the new hat that she will be wearing. So with that, on this beautiful day in Virginia, and I hope it is the same in many other parts of the country, Pam, I'm going to turn it over to you and your team for an update of where we stand today and the timeline as we look to move forward.
Super. Thanks, Missy. So where we are with the report is that we've been working to incorporate all of the terrific feedback that we received from all of you through your subcommittees and individually as well. Getting all of that feedback into the content draft that you responded to. And then we spent the last little more than a week also receiving feedback from a variety of offices at DOE through the Energy Workforce Strategy Council or Committee. And that's been really valuable as well. And so we're incorporating that. And now we're moving into the readability phase of adjusting the language, and it's starting to really gel into some very concrete concepts, and then those concepts are moving into very actionable recommendations. So that's what I'm hopeful that you'll see reflected in the next round of revisions. You should be receiving the next round of revisions no later than May 6th. We hope maybe a little earlier than that, after we've received a little bit more high-level feedback on making sure that we're making these recommendations that come from all of you actionable and clear and accessible to readers. Once the May 6th deadline, or once the May 6th date comes, we'll ask that you have additional feedback back to us in a week, so that we can then incorporate that into one more round, we hope, of revisions for everybody to take a look at. And then you will all decide if the report is ready to submit.
Pam, thanks for that update. Any questions or comments from the group on the update that was just provided? I have one. Pam, as we approach today's meeting, where we'll be talking about what's left, what's missing, we certainly don't want to start over in our thinking. How can this team, as we approach the conversation today, and as we anticipate the draft coming to us on May 6th, how can we be most helpful to you and your team in the work that remains to be done?
That's a great question. I would suggest that folks continue to, particularly if it's something big and substantial, certainly send that to us, because we're still working on revisions, and the report can continue to be revised as you all need it to be revised. Typically, we can incorporate revisions fairly quickly. So please continue to send those, and then also potentially understand that if you don't see it in the next revision document that you get, there's still another bite at the apple, right? That those revisions can still be incorporated, and we may reach out to you and say, talk to us more about where that revision fits in. So I think that's all really valuable. In addition, though, as I think you pointed out in your introduction, or in the beginning of the meeting, there is the sense that the committee will continue to work and provide additional information beyond this report. So the committee can also be thinking about which pieces are suitable for your next set, your next round of report.
Thanks for that, Pam. And I heard both you and Maya reference the word actionable. So I think at this point in time, as you're looking to call months worth of information into a paper, and then I believe with that an executive summary, rather than identifying other issues, is it fair to say you really are looking at this point for actionable items that should make this next paper, saving other observations for paper number 2 or a supplemental work product?
I think that's particularly helpful. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. All right. Any questions or comments on this before we leave this topic and move into discussion? Okay, so hearing none. First area that we're going to talk about today is looking at DOE's unique position to lead in the workforce development space. We all know from the work that's been happening, the work we do in our day jobs, that this is a significant opportunity for workforce development as we look at the energy sector. And the department is indeed uniquely positioned to lead what is needed here. We've seen their leadership in the technical aspects of looking at the energy transition. They also are very intentional to make sure that they are leading in the people part of the energy transition as well. So you'll see on the slide that is before you some of the, areas that have been identified where DOE really does have that unique posture to enable them to be leaders for the sector as a whole and its various stakeholders. I'll give everyone just a moment to familiarize themselves with what's listed here. And then I'd like to delve into discussion a little bit further in terms of how we may build on this, looking at what's resonating from this list, what might be missing from this list, anything we really want to pull forward so they can look to those areas of strength, and then delving into any other ideas that may surface based on a review of these strengths that may come up as one of those actionable considerations that the group may have as we look at prioritizing what makes the cut in this first paper. So let me just give a pause here, give everyone a minute to refresh themselves. And for those that are having trouble looking at the 2-point font, I'll give I'll give a quick highlight. I don't happen to have my readers handy. So best in class STEM education infrastructure and reputation. We've certainly heard and seen a lot about that. Obviously, the powerful impact of research and development investment that's being made, particularly through the national labs. And I do hope we can have some extended conversation about the labs. I do think we continue to recognize the role that they have the potential to play. Developing a suite of trade and technical energy workforce programs. First of all, and also I guess I should say it's listed as number 4 on here, but it probably belongs at number 1, that we even have an Office of Energy Jobs that is well positioned to work across the department in executing a forward-looking workforce strategy and providing information and guidance to external stakeholders. Strong working relationship with key stakeholders, including employers, labor, trade associations, tribal governments, etc. And then, as I alluded earlier, really historic federal investments that are being made in a zero emission economy and strong incentives for funding recipients that will invest in quality jobs to attract and train and retain a skilled workforce. Oh, and I guess, I'm sorry, the last one, I don't know if it's all in this list. That's the next, I think it's maybe the next slide. The power of those investments and the voice that the department has to be able to influence other agencies, congressional leaders, et cetera, as we're all working toward those same solutions. So with that, I'd love to, again, take pause here, see what really speaks to you from this list, and see what might be missing that you or your task force has identified as a unique competency that the department offers that we should consider here.
I see Daniel Marshall has his hand up.
Thanks. Hi, Dan.
Yes, hi. Thank you, Missy. In terms of point number 5, the stakeholders, there is a group here that I think could be added. Over the past 20, even 30 years, across the country, there has been an explosion of interest and activities by workforce intermediary organizations and workforce intermediary partnerships. This is an area that has been studied extensively in the past. There are probably 150, 200, 300 of these organizations. And the Aspen Institute has done some outstanding work here. And Maureen, I know you'll recognize the book that the Aspen Institute put out. It's 2014. During that period, many of those organizations still exist. They're community-based organizations. They are in many labor markets. They're in close touch with exactly the populations that we would like to see, and they would be a very viable sector of organizations, individuals, community leaders to be involved in the future, and for the Department of Energy to take a close look at what they could do, especially what they could do on this larger issue of building a clean energy economy, a sustainable economy in the future. Foundations have also done some great work on this. I know, Sarita, you're familiar with that as well. But this is a big sector that is ordinarily kind of invisible. They don't pop up in the same way as, say, education institutions, but they're a very viable, important sector.
Dan, thanks for bringing that forward. Do you have a copy of that book on that very academic bookshelf I see behind you?
Of course, it's right here. How's this, Maureen?
Well done.
Thank you, Dan. I didn't realize you were my publicist. Appreciate it.
Fantastic. And Dan, that's
cost free.
Thank you for pulling that forward. And Maureen, thank you to your organization for really putting that together. I do think you bring up a good point. I think there are so many different organizations, so many different entities and stakeholders that are really looking for their partners. Who are their thinking partners? Who should we be working with? And so updating the 2014 list certainly could be something that would be a great opportunity. And it looks like a good add here in section 5. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say that I think one of the first of all, thank you, Dan, for bringing that up. I think that is a myth to not think about them. I think one of the challenges that federal agencies have had in sort of recognizing workforce intermediaries per se is because they some are nonprofits, some are sort of public agencies actually. So some are, you know, within the public workforce system, some are not, and some are worker centers, some are other kinds of community-based nonprofits. So they come a little bit in different shapes and forms depending on sort of what's the need to kind of pull, you know, sort of what's the gap in institutional arrangements in their area and how they can pull people together. Some are industry associations I've seen sort of play a workforce intermediary role. So I'm happy to sort of like, and Dan too, like we could try to think with you about how to characterize, how to find and include them, because I think that sometimes can be a little bit of a stumbling block.
I'm hearing volunteers. Dan, I think you were volunteered, but Maureen, thank you to you for your willingness to help lead in that space. And I do think Maya and I, in fact, were having a conversation somewhat related to this the other day. I do think that there is a significant quest for information, and the more engaged leadership we can have in that space and be able to point people in the direction of organizations that may be able to assist, I think would be very valuable. Perhaps the department bringing those groups together to both inform and learn from could also provide another layer of value.
Yeah, this is Sarita. I wanted to just chime in here. Thank you, Dan, for raising it. And thank you, Maureen, for the comments you just made. And I just want to make one more connection around the importance of some of these intermediaries. And that gets back to one of the goals, which is to build a diverse, skilled workforce. And when I first read this, I was like, oh my God, we've like left out this whole community of organizations and intermediaries out there who really are trying to address some of what we have in our subcommittee talked about in terms of the barriers to employment. So I appreciate us lifting that back up, because that feels very concrete for me of how we're making sure, again, that we're having a comprehensive picture. And Missy, I love the idea of like, could we have, yes, Amanda, exactly. I was thinking about you as well. But I feel like the idea of the department actually hosting a conversation or convening with some of these intermediaries to have this conversation, I think there's a lot to learn in real time right now. So I just want to double down on that one.
Perfect. Really appreciating the validation of this as an opportunity for EWAB to help create some structure for and provide some recommendations to the department. Thank you to everyone for surfacing that and the willingness to help bring this forward.
And Gerard has his hand up.
Yeah, and this I guess is on the same vein as intermediaries, but Maria did a great job of differentiating. You know, sometimes intermediaries are not all community-based organizations. So I just wanted to highlight, you know, kind of the, you know, smaller to mid-sized community-based organizations that are doing work in this space. And I do applaud the agency of trying to work on the FOAs and some of the paper reduction and even some of the, you know, some of the reporting and even advancing money for the small to mid-sized community-based organizations doing work in this space because of just a lack of capacity and capital on managing DOE funds and so forth, but also a great partner for our national labs.
Thanks for that. Gerard, just to make sure, and I think we'll hit them later in the agenda as well, but you just referenced the national labs, and I have heard some offline discussions about, are we doing enough in this report to really reflect on the leadership power they have, the resources that are invested in the lab? Just because you brought them forward in this part of the agenda, anything you wanted to add about how we should recognize them as a unique entity and draw upon the resources and expertise they have?
Yeah, wow. You know, and I'm still learning more about the national labs for this past year and a half or so. But you know, I really have found out just through our work and interviewing and talking to them, they are a wealth of resources, and then also they have some unique partnerships, and also their scalability. So, for example, we kind of saw a gap in even our recommendations is how well the national labs could work as not so much an intermediary focus, but me as a lead organizer in the sector in their regions with bringing in the K through 12 system, the community colleges, employers, and IBCs as a convener, either to launch pilots, try to overcome friction points within the workforce system, because they're at the cutting edge, I would say the bleeding edge of some of the research and deployment, and where everybody else is still waiting for the white paper to come out to see how to react. So if we could bring the national labs and these community stakeholders to practice within their regions of specialization, it's not such a lag of implementation. And we all know in this workforce development space, to do workforce development well, it's just not a shake and bake deal. It takes time to develop a really good technician with even just base theory to move forward in any occupation. So if they could bring what they're doing on the bleeding edge to the people who are on the ground implementing I think there's some great traction and partnerships that we can create and foster and grow as we move forward in this transition.
Thanks for that. And I share in this learning journey that you've been on, really have appreciated the chance to learn from the national labs and learn about the incredible work that they're doing. And hopefully that will be something we can continue to learn more about and see how there may be additional workforce support opportunities there. All right, anything else from this list in terms of kind of the specific value that DOE offers in this space that we've not hit on?
Missy,
Hear
it's
then,
Chris
Chris.
Levesque. I hope you can hear me now.
Hi, Chris.
Yep. Maybe it's not an addition to the list. It's maybe more of a framing statement. And it's something I heard from Bethany Jones in our first EWAB meeting, where she said something like, part of the motivation for creating the EWAB was, via the infrastructure bill and the IRA and the creation of the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, this whole new part of DOE, we now have DOE in this role where, like for example, in the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, DOE is responsible for billions and billions of clean energy demonstration projects, for example, which is totally new. DOE's always been, running the labs and overseeing PhD programs, but this aspect of DOE actually owning projects where, they're flowing down requirements to companies like mine on, very large projects that affect craft workers. That just stuck with me, that, there's some things with workforce that DOE's been doing for a long time, like PhDs, but because of IRA and infrastructure and the massive amount of projects that DOE is overseeing, the craft focus is kind of a new one. So that was something that just stayed with me from comments I heard from Bethany in the beginning.
Thanks for pulling that forward, Chris. You really are underscoring what an important time this is. Again, I think I may have mentioned earlier, DOE historically is focused on the technology and how we're making sure we're powering and fueling the country. I think there's been an assumption, not just within the department, but in society as a whole. You deal with the technical stuff, and of course there'll be people there that can come along and take care of things. But now, because of the historic investments that have been made, I believe that the working number is 22 million people that the industry needs to hire and train over the next 10 years. I do applaud the department's intent to really make sure that they are focusing on the people part of the industry. And that is, these are my words, not the department's, but the people part of the business is really needs to be worked on with the same importance as the technological side of the industry as well. Any other comments? I unfortunately can't see anyone's hands here. So any other comments in this area?
Oh, could you hear me?
I can.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, and I appreciate them double click on Gerard. It's not that workforce development is not just a shake and bake. That there's a lot more to it than sort of a quick skills training. And I think this issue of bringing in workforce intermediaries and that whole community, it's not just about isolating skills, but it's also about addressing all of the barriers. It's about supporting people in sort of the understanding the culture of different kinds of workplaces and being able to make a successful transition and sort of, thinking about the broad set of things. And I think, you know, I think it would be great for DOE to think about, being best in class. What does that mean? And how do they sort of, be best in class in terms of being sort of, okay, I'm always on this, but be best in class in terms of the quality of their jobs and how they engage people in their workplaces and being open and transparent about that as they sort of are industry leaders in this space. I think that would be, sort of really valuable to kind of set that tone.
Maureen, that might be a perfect segue. Unless anyone has anything else on the discussion topic where we were, our next discussion area is really looking at what's ahead for us. Our next paper in 2 years, any other supplemental work we may wish to do between the two. So going once on this last section, and before we totally bridge over to what's next, Maya, DOE team, Pam, Berkeley team, anything you all wish to add to the list we've just been discussing?
What's also not on the list is apprenticeship. Do folks have comments on whether they see apprenticeship as belonging on that list as well? Apprenticeship organizations or entities?
I would say yes. For some reason, I'm surprised I overlooked that, but yeah. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
apprenticeship.
definitely. Yes. So,
I agree.
Sounds like good validation. It's amazing how much time we can all spend looking at this list and doing a mental check, 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 check. It's all here. And then the 100th time you've looked at it, things start coming forward. So appreciate this on the agenda today so we could all give it I want to say a final glance, but something tells me we may still find some other things that need to be added over time.
well, and Melissa, I shouldn't own up to this, but when I saw unions, I think apprenticeships, but we know there are a lot of non-union registered apprenticeship programs that are out there. So yeah, it should be highlighted differently.
And I do think, just from my own work, I do think that registered apprenticeship programs are seeing a greater level of interest in a lot of energy companies, particularly legacy companies like utilities. And because of the significant need we have for attracting all of these individuals and making sure that they receive high-level training for jobs before them, I think RAPs are being looked at as a good opportunity and good solution there in new ways that haven't necessarily been done before.
Yeah, I guess I think, Gerard, to your point, I think apprenticeships certainly are part of the puzzle in some way, but I wouldn't see them on that list just because I don't necessarily see them as an institutional type. I see them as a strategy. And you can have apprenticeships I've seen apprenticeships that involve community colleges that are, of course, based in unions, that are in other kinds of organizations. So registered apprenticeships. So anyway, Dan, you want?
So I'm hearing the suggestion there, Maureen, maybe we want to look at this in terms of what's next for us. Maybe we want to look at a paper on the importance of RAPs in the energy industry, or looking at those more in depth in our next paper.
Yeah,
I think the challenge with apprenticeships is that you have apprenticeship-like training in many institutions. And then you have the registered apprenticeship program, which is institutionalized. So there are many apprenticeship programs that, as they evolve, may become registered apprenticeship. But to tackle both of those areas, apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship programs, understanding registered apprenticeship programs are generally the highest quality, especially in the building and construction trades. But that's an issue. And a final comment on workforce intermediaries from my sociological perspective and my study of 150 writings on workforce intermediaries. Right now, these workforce intermediaries are kind of a disparate group of organizations who vary tremendously depending on their local conditions and labor markets. They have not become an institution. In order to become an institution, you have to have federal government intervention and involvement. And the prospect of the Department of Energy convening the sort of conversation that Sarita mentioned, it means that the Department of Education could play a very important role, literally historically, on helping to turn those organizations into an institutional presence.
I think we have absolutely found our resident expert, unless anyone else has read 151 books on this topic. I think, Dan, you're going to wear the crown in that area for us.
Okay.
And glad to have your perspective there. I think this will be an important area as we continue to move forward. All right, let's go ahead and move over to looking forward. We've talked as a group before about, what your subcommittee didn't necessarily have time to delve into, or not even time, but of all the different paths you could take to do the work that's needed to have been done. There may be some things that were very important, but perhaps weren't as timely as some of the other things that needed to be explored and put in this first paper. So I'd like to open up the floor for any of the subcommittees to talk about what questions you want to delve into a little bit further, or what areas of workforce development within the sector might you start putting on a list for paper number 2. And Gerard, not to put you on the spot, but I did hear through the grapevine that maybe you and your work group may have had some things that you've considered in this area.
Yeah, so I think we had some tight schedules, so we try to compile something as quickly as possible for some feedback. But on our first report, a lot of the one-to-ones or organizing and just getting feedback, even from our subcommittee members, have just a wealth of knowledge. These were probably some key takeaways of some things that we might have realized we all couldn't fit into the space confinement, and we need some further research and vetting, some questions unanswered. I think some of these are kind of self-evident in many aspects, but one thing that kind of stood out with with AI, automation, and then how smart the pieces of equipment that are being developed, either from your home controls, building controls, to your heavy equipment machinery, they're a lot smarter. And the typically on quality jobs of training technicians is how well they can troubleshoot. So one thing that we're kind of realizing with this newer, smarter, self-diagnosing equipment that's being produced, what will be the quality jobs role of a troubleshooting technician? And be able to troubleshoot is how you can justify your pay and of your problem-solving technicians, instead of just plug and playing, just changing out parts. So we don't know what that means. And there might be some different things of, you still may need 7 years of experience to work on certain pieces of equipment, no matter how simple it may be. But I think there's some vetting out, some things we need to do with the industry, and also maybe the labs too, of saying what those policies and controls could be, maybe to protect a worker and their pay, but also just the general safety of some of these high voltage and more technically advanced equipment. But still, it may be simpler to repair, but you still may need base knowledge to move forward. Something that we don't know, but we also know sometimes companies would love to suppress wages, and if you only need 2 weeks of training, 2 weeks of training to change that part, why would I pay somebody 10 years experience to do the same job? Something just unanswered, but something we could vet out down the line. I think one thing we wanted to talk more, and I think this is where it's to Dan's on the intermediaries, community-based organizations, and even some funders, is how can we get more reentry individuals back into these occupations? And there's still kind of a lot of myths a lot of practices and a lot of unknowns. We don't know if it's insurance, we don't know if it's policy, we don't know if it's the agency or type of they're working on that are preventing individuals with the skills to work in these occupations. Need some more vetting out with that. And then also this kind of collecting data. We came across a group at MIT that I thought was very unique, where they're working with cities that have emission goals, trying to get to carbon, zero by 2050. And it's through retrofitting of buildings and spaces. And what was very unique that we didn't really come across with our labs is that they're able to do actual real-time projections of how many mini split heat pump installers that they're needing, how many insulators, how many roofers, how many solar panel techs and electricians are needed for each jobs to get to the city's retrofitting opportunities to their carbon goals, and how that modeling could be piloted through the labs to get individuals from the community to do the work, but also kind of do it in a very real-time manner, so you're not overtraining in a population or in an area where it's suppressing wages because they're saturated, but it hit in real time. And then just the last one, I kind of mentioned this before, but it's also a little additional partner is our energy, justice, and equity team. They're doing a lot of good work across the board with community benefits plans, but it's also trying to see how we can partner with them or see what opportunities working with them and with the national labs to flesh out different pilot opportunities or ideas, maybe to try to remove silos in some areas where you have great weatherization labs and how weatherization can lead to career training, either through the community college, to the unions and others, and also how to work with ex-offenders and other things that are going on. Not so much the silos with a lot of activity, but how can we coordinate some of those activities at the ground with community-based partners that are doing some good work. And that's about all. And I'm not sure if Tom, Kay, or Allison have anything else to add that I may have missed.
No, I think you did a great job, Gerard. One thing that I would just add is on the point that we have here about ex-offenders or reentrants. One of the things that I guess I've seen show up, and I can imagine is probably going to show up in other energy jobs, is sometimes these are sensitive sites, whether the work is kind of taking place at a port that's governed by the Marine Transportation Security Act, or if it's a secured site because of we're doing small nuclear reactors or things like that. It can require background checks, and obviously background checks are going to be more difficult for folks that are reentering. And it might pose an additional barrier. So also maybe having the Department of Energy looking at some of the rules and regulations around some of the sensitive sites might be useful to make sure that we're addressing those kind of structural barriers as well.
The one thing that I would add, this is Tom Krieger from NAB2, and I appreciate you throwing that open, Gerard, is I didn't think about this when the apprenticeship comment came up before. I didn't think about this, but the more I think about it, I think the DOE can have a role in there. I mean, the one federal department, the agency that we really think should have a role in that, and they don't, is education. That we know this because we work with school counselors all over the country. We actually sponsor the National Association of American School Counselor Association, ASCA. We sponsor their national conference, and we need the Department of Energy they do a great job of advocating for kids to go to college. They don't really do much of a job to advocate for kids to go into, young men and women to go into apprenticeship. So that would be one. And I think the Department of Energy could do the same thing. I mean, because if you're really going to attract a future workforce in the all of the energy fields, you're going to have to use high road jobs. Is that young people today, they're looking for careers with meaning and all that, and they also look for good pay and benefits. I mean, those are the jobs. I mean, the worker shortages that everybody talks about in construction today are more on the research shows they're more on the non-union side than the other side. We have good pay and benefits. That's going to attract people. And I think there is a role for the Department of Energy to also make that case that, that it's going to be high road jobs that will attract people to the energy sector, and, apprenticeship done right, registered apprenticeship done right is really one of those high road pathways.
Good. Thank you, Tom. Anything else? And let me tell you what I'm going to do. I've been putting in the things that have been addressed for possible round 2 papers or supplemental papers between now and then. And I'll post that to the chat in just a second. And then I'm going to ask this team to look at, is there anything that you've identified for the future that we may want to say, whoops, we need to really prioritize this for paper 1. This may help us just fact check ourselves and make sure that anything that we're surfacing now, we haven't missed for round 1, and that we have indeed the time to wait for round 2 or a supplemental paper. So thank you, Gerard, for teeing up so many different things that your group has considered and maybe worthy of round 2 or something supplemental. What other things have any other groups identified that they'd like to add on to this list for round 2?
In terms of the effectiveness subcommittee, Missy?
That would be great. Thank you, Dan, for sharing.
Right. So one of the things that we proposed is that after looking at all the different activities of the various parts of the Department of Energy and their effectiveness, what you begin to see is a movement towards training for persons at the level of community colleges and high school graduates. We've seen, and I think it's the MESC program that has talked about that specifically, beginning to move from bachelor level programs to community colleges. I don't think that particular point is incorporated in this version of the paper. And it's a valuable area because we already see DOE activity here. And we're talking about building upon it and accentuating it.
Thank you for sharing that, Dan. I just shared in the chat feature what I've heard reflected so far as other big areas that have surfaced for consideration. Let me invite everyone to make sure that that's reflective of the discussion so far. Anything I may have missed, please feel free to either put it in the chat or add to the conversation. And then I would ask everyone to take a look here and see if there are any of these items that you would like to say, oh, hold the presses. We want to make sure we include in round 1. And again, not trying to start from scratch, but is there anything on this list that is incredibly pressing enough? We need to make sure to add commentary in the paper that is to be finished by June. Or are we comfortable with leaving these as supplemental work products to be delved into by this committee beyond this first paper?
So to Dan's last point, I think the movement to community colleges and technical schools is something that should be included in this report and in a very specific, and I would also add HBCUs to that category. And I would, I think like a very actionable thing, and related earlier to the question about the labs and the assets of the labs for the Department of Energy, is really thinking about how the national labs can be develop clearer partnerships or be more accessible to community colleges, HBCUs, and career and technical education. I think there's been like a PhD piece, and even in the comments back from Energy, it's like, what can we do on K-12, but they keep missing sort of this clear middle grouping, which I would put in the career technical education, community colleges, HBCUs as being the group of educational institutions that we need to be able to create better metrics around.
I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense, Amanda. Thanks for surfacing that as a additional context to report 1. Let me ask this, Pam, we've heard from Amanda and Dan an interest of making sure that we've got wording included in paper 1. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask today? And with that, I'd also like to ask Dan and Amanda if the Berkeley team does have some questions on how to add some supplemental language here. Would you all be interested and willing to work with them?
Sure.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Pam, any questions that you have related to that?
I don't have any specific questions. I think it was really useful and clear, and I think some of that emerged in some of the feedback that we got from different folks. So we've incorporated some of that already, but let's keep sharpening it. And I would I may be asking for some help as we go forward in making those as actionable as we can, right? So we start out, the DOE needs to do something to connect the labs better to the community college or the career and technical college system, for example, and then getting to that place of what is that DOE needs to do. Very, what is the actionable specific thing is a little bit more challenging. So if folks could think about that, I guess maybe that's my question, and we'll work together to incorporate that language.
Perfect. Okay. Anything else? We're multitaskers. We're finishing project 1 and we're already thinking about project 2. Okay. Maya, let me turn to you for a second. And from the department standpoint, is there anything else you would like to make sure that we hit on here? Any area we haven't gone deep enough into this discussion that would be useful to you and your team?
Thanks. I think that the discussion earlier about the role for the department in supporting workforce intermediaries is one that is not just to be addressed in that section about, DOE's comparative advantage, but we were looking at making the recommendations around supporting sector strategies in high priority areas of the department more actionable. What are some near-term areas of the department could start on there that the board would recommend? What would supporting workforce intermediaries there look like? Would the labs be leveraged in that way? Would they not? What would it look like? I think answering that, line of questioning about how can the department build up workforce intermediaries to advance sector strategies in specific high priority areas is one that would be a missed opportunity, I think, to not address in this paper.
In paper 1.
Paper 1.
Okay. Dan?
Yes, I think there is an actionable item here that would be a valuable contribution for the Department of Energy to make, again, on this workforce intermediary area. Workforce intermediary field and the development of sector strategies in states and localities are closely linked. They have happened at just about the same time, but they happened a number of years ago, and they've kind of fallen away from our attention, and what would be very useful would be a systematic study of what states, localities, other basically government level entities have done in the area of sector strategies. And this goes back a number of years where states maybe 20 years ago looked at their economies, identified the growing sectors and the target sectors, and began focusing on that. Essentially, the states adopted their own kind of mini industrial strategies. Now we have the idea of industrial strategies has gone national. And that's what the federal government is doing in terms of moving towards a clean energy economy. The information is out there. It's a huge job to identify what states, localities, chambers of commerce, and other entities have done in this area of sector strategies / workforce intermediaries. That could be a very actionable task.
Dan, I know you kindly raised your hand to help as we started looking at the last point that was made. Again, going back to the 150 publications that you've read in this space. And Amanda, you raised your hand for the last task as well, but reflecting on the fact you actually do the work of working with intermediaries, might we consider double tasking you all to help in this, bring this component to life in this paper one as well?
Sure.
Sure, and I would add Maureen and Sarita there. We go back far enough, we remember all this stuff, right?
Yeah, for sure. I spent quite a, I think a couple decades writing about sector strategies. So
What's old is new again.
yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, Maureen, thank you for accepting the invitation. And Sarita?
Yeah, I'm happy to as well. Yes.
Great. Thank you guys for the willingness there. I do think that is a good add, and I do like the idea of that being taken care of now, because I think the time for action there and the leadership now is going to be better than 2 years from now for sure, because I think there is a scramble for information. All right, we've got an A team assembled there.
I see Gerard has his hand up.
Yes, and it kind of goes to Maya's request on the leveraging of national labs. I think, even in the community benefits plans, the ones that I've come across, I think they're all part of a community benefits plan. If it's a hydrogen or semiconductor or battery project, but it would be neat to see them have a more of a lead convener role, even outside whatever floor that went out. I think there's a way of positioning them more than just being a partner of that sector as I guess more of a leader. And some may or may not. It's just a handful of community benefit plans I've worked on. But there is a void, and it would be interesting to see. I don't know, with this, it would be great with this administration. We do have areas like I am in the Gulf South where there's not a national lab. And I know there's how the national labs come to be it's a process, but I don't know. It's an intermediary, it's the foundation. There could be some exploration of developing national labs, like in the Gulf South, where you do have hydrogen, petrochemical, carbon capture, is a expansion or partnership in this areas that are void of labs. And since they provide so many resources and strategic investments, I don't know if this probably outside this. I don't know if this is inside the scope of what we're doing here, but it would, if we could expand the resources or thoughts working with university or something. And it may be something there I just don't know of. And maybe that may be something to be studied too, is what is filling the void in areas where there's no national labs with this energy transition. That's probably a better question. Sorry, it took me a while to get there.
It was all worth getting to. We appreciate that. Maya, any thoughts on whether that's within the scope? I know that we are asked by the charter to look at the national labs and their role in workforce development. Thoughts on whether adding additional labs in areas where we may be underrepresented or communities may be within scope or or outside of our scope?
Well, I think the statute says to have a strategy that considers how the department can better leverage national labs. So, that if that's the conclusion of the board, to look at whether there's an opportunity for more labs, I mean, that could be the interpretation. But I think that recommend, rephrasing it as an analysis of what the boards can do, what they have done, what they've been effective and not effective in doing, and also thinking about their comparative advantage in their communities and regions. It may not be the board's conclusion necessarily that these should be the energy, workforce intermediaries that are really bulked up. It could be the conclusion. But yeah, I would just look at it. I would suggest looking at it as sort of I think there's some things to learn about the labs, what they've been doing, how effective they've been doing it, and taking a recommendation that goes from those findings.
I know when we were talking about this meeting and some of the things that may come up in this look ahead to 2 years in the future, we talked about maybe taking a deeper dive into some of those. However, seeing the list that's been developed, I think many of these could be meetings in and of themselves as we look at, cyber issues, or we look at AI and automation. I don't even know that cyber's on here, but AI and automation. I would suggest that maybe we take a deeper dive in another meeting or two, and perhaps bring in some people who are working in this space that may be able to give us some initial thought starters before we start probing further. Again, each and any of these could be an hour's discussion, I'm sure, in and of itself. So if everyone feels comfortable with that, I'm going to add cyber just in my notes here because I don't think we got to that. And if that would be something I think that is continuing to come up as an area of importance. So I'm going to just add cyber to that list. If there's, I'm seeing a couple shakes of heads there. So if that's okay, I'll take the liberty of adding that as a possible other area for us to take some additional action on. We've got just about, yeah, go ahead, Gerard.
I did have one recommendation was for, and I guess kind of Maya alluded to it, it was to provide a recommendation to conduct analysis of workforce development activities that are being invested already at the national labs. That's one thing we did not do. So I would like to make that recommendation.
Workforce development abilities of the national labs.
Yes, conduct an analysis of workforce development activities that are being invested in and at the national labs.
Gerard, and do you see that as paper one or beyond paper one?
I don't know. Probably beyond paper one. I just don't know the time constraints to do that analysis of. Maya probably have a better feel of how quickly the national labs could do a self-audit or evaluation, or they're on contract with somebody to do the evaluation. A lot needs to take place to do that level of research. Unless it's going on right now. It could be happening today. So I don't know. I'll defer to Maya.
It sounds like in terms of the paper one, that's a action item, more of a recommendation for the department. And then the analysis would inform the boards. The board could take it from there.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. So put the recommendation in the paper one and then as a to-do list.
I like it. Perfect. And we wondered what we were going to do with ourselves after paper one, huh? I love the areas that have surfaced and the curiosities to take us on the next journey in a way that we hope can be helpful to the department. Dan.
Back to automation for a moment. The Department of Energy has a very direct and important link here with Bethany Jones and the Office of Energy Jobs leading the Battery Workforce Initiative, which is developing a national curriculum to train advanced battery workers. And this is a sector in which we are really seeing over the next 10 years or so, a growth of automation in those gigafactories. There's a great deal of automation in those leading factories in China and other places. We're building that in the United States, but the Department of Energy is a very central actor in this role and could make a big contribution of discussing the progress in that area.
That's a great poll, Dan. And I do know that we have spotlighted the Battery Workforce Initiative within the paper because it was such an excellent example of bringing everyone together. But that's another way to look at it. And thank you for surfacing that. It's a great example. Okay. We've got just about 4 minutes until we'll move over to the public comment period. Anything else that has hit anyone through this discussion? Dan, do you have your hand up again, or is okay? Pull it down. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else? Let me just bring us just for 5 minutes. If So if we're looking at what information would be most helpful to make available to the public to better access all of the resources DOE has for workforce development, what things come to mind? For instance, if we're going to say in the report, an area that talks about the focus areas of making resources and information more readily available, more usable, not dust collectors, what might you think some of those recommendations that we should pull forward might be? What do we want the public to most be able to access that the department has as a resource?
This is Deanna. I think that, tools that are aligned with what would most benefit the public would be, the right place to start. I think what Dan just articulated with the Battery Workforce Initiative is a great example of that. It's a program that benefits the public and those that are seeking to develop new skills and enter the workforce. So I almost feel like resources that are directly relatable to the experience of individuals is probably a very important bucket to assemble based on all of the work that's been done in this first report to then share forward.
Thanks for the ad on that. And Deanna, I know you've done tremendous work on that project. So well said and well done. So I'm hearing from Deanna's first comment in this spot is maybe pulling out recommendations for employers that may wish to emulate other practices that have been done. So we could certainly have an employer recommendation of accessible options. What other audiences might we want to focus on? We've talked a lot today about students that are looking for their what's next, and it may not be a four-year university. Maybe there's another category of resources that could be made available to students and those considering energy careers.
This is
Yeah.
not,
Well, go ahead, Amanda.
I was going to say, this is not necessarily, there's multiple people who I think are the end users for this, but I'm surprised. I was surprised by myself. And I know this is true, like within folks who work in the traditional workforce development field, not having a sense of how many programs and how much investment the Department of Energy does in workforce development. And so some kind of workforce, like a live action, real time workforce development map of workforce development programs that come out of the Department of Energy would just be, I think, be helpful for people to understand the resources that are available there. And not necessarily for not for a student but just for people to kind of understand. There's probably like workforce development practitioners who would appreciate that kind of resource.
I like it. And I love myself a live action map. I think that's awesome. It's very visual and it really helps people to understand. So I'm hearing, thinking about the different audiences, employers, workforce development systems, students, and maybe in the report, giving them the different audiences, and there may be others. I can see educators being part of that as well. Just directing them through the report to resources that they might find useful. And obviously, whenever the report is produced, it will be time stamped, but just alluding to the types of resources they can find there and recognizing others will be added. Pam and Maya, does that help give some context to that area of what we might include in the report there?
Yes, I appreciate that, taking good notes.
Okay, great, thank you. It is right now just about 4:10, so just to take a pause from some of the discussion and would like to open up the agenda for any guests that we may have on the line who have comments to share. Just as a reminder, the EWAB board is not able to respond to the comments that may be posed or any questions that are offered, but we certainly do welcome them to guide our education and information in the work that is before us. So Maya, any comments that have come in from anyone on the call today or anyone who would like time?
Thanks. We have two requests for public comment. We'll start with Andrew Reamer. Again, as you can see on the slide, we have a 3-minute limit per speaker. So take it away, Andrew.
Thank you, Maya, and thank you, committee. I've sent ahead of time some comments. Maya, were they distributed to the committee?
We've received those, Andrew. Thank
Yeah,
you.
they were distributed.
Okay, great, thank you. So it's really on this notion that you were covering earlier today about what's in demand. It seems to me that there are two valuable sources of information that are available to you. One is the expertise in 8 other federal advisory committees, 5 in DOE, the Joint DOE DOT Electric Vehicle Working Group, and 2 industry-based committees at the Commerce Department. So I'm curious, I certainly recommend that you consider how to make use of the expertise in those committees regarding the demand for skilled energy workforce. And then the second is the actually to the point that Dan made earlier regarding sector strategies. At the moment, as you know, there are 500 state workforce boards, 500 local workforce boards, and 50 state workforce boards, each of which designates in-demand occupations and sectors. They have to do that in order to spend their money from the Department of Labor. So before industrial strategy, DOL did not care what sectors were designated. It was entirely up to the community. But now it's an issue nationwide for national strategy, and it's also a resource to imagine a map of in-demand energy sectors and occupations that you could look at across 500 workforce board areas. The data are there at the Labor Department, and it does not exist. So I encourage the committee to consider asking the Secretary to ask the Secretary of Labor for ETA to provide you and provide the department with a map, an up-to-date map of in-demand occupations and sectors. Certainly it's useful for every part of the federal government, but in particular the Department of Energy. So that's for your consideration. I put information in my comment that I forwarded to you. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have, and thank you for your time.
Andrew,
Great, thank you.
for your comments. Appreciate that. Maya, go ahead.
Thanks. Yes, and just as a reminder, Angelica did forward out to all the members the comments and materials from Mr. Reamer. Our next public commenter will be Jack Karsten.
Hi, I'm Jack Karsten. I'm a PhD student at George Washington University. I work with Andrew Reamer, and I wanted to sort of follow up on his public comments, sort of mentioning these in-demand occupations lists that local workforce boards put together. In lieu of sort of a nationally descriptive and available list and map of these in-demand occupations, we've been sort of doing this project to sort of do a sampling of different methodologies that local workforce boards use. So I would like to sort of offer that to the workforce board and here as a resource for making recommendations. So I've just starting a project earlier this year, I sort of picked 10 of these and sort of made a description of them both as in a spreadsheet with different variables, and then also sort of a written description of 10 different ones, just to give a flavor of what different workforce boards use, what criteria they use, both quantitative and qualitative, to select in-demand occupations that can be, training programs can be funded using WIOA money. So I am wrapping up that description, and I will have I can send it to the workforce board as written comments for your consideration. I'm also, like Andrew, I'm also available for any reactions to my comments or questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks to you both. Okay, that concludes the public comment period. Missy, would you like to go back to either of these discussion slides?
Let me just take a pulse read, and also thank you to those who have joined us today. We appreciate your engagement. To members of the EWAB board, is there anything that we did not have the ability to take a deep enough dive into that you'd like to go back to before we adjourn in about 15 minutes or 10 minutes? We've covered a lot of ground today, but I do want to just give a minute or two here on any of the discussion topics that we most recently put on the table.
Hey, Missy, it's Gerard.
Hi, Gerard.
Hey, one thing about the outreach and marketing, and I think we probably talked about this, but also this came from one of my one-to-ones. There's a lack of I'll say diversity of image, of high quality images of technicians that are BIPOC and women in the field that are kind of open sources for colleges or K through 12 or just for general marketing purposes. So if there's a way to create a more robust database of images, using, people working on the right equipment, the right PPE that are staged with perfection, with right SMEs guiding the photos, it really would help us try to recruit a more diverse workforce in there. I think it really helps for people to see others like them in the field, or even working with our industry partners. But yeah, we need more images that are high quality for that.
I'm sensing a photo contest that DOE is going to run here. Great thought. I know it's a big need. We run into that with our own organization. Thank you for that suggestion. Amanda, I see you coming on camera here. Want to add to that? You just want to say hello. All right. Thank you. No worries.
See Maureen's
You
hand and then Dan.
Okay.
Yes. Gerard has just raised the issue of a database, and I think this builds upon Amanda's comments. At a presentation in Michigan a few weeks ago, the Secretary of Energy, Granholm, made a point that there are something like 400, I think it was 400 efforts in the United States in the battery manufacturing area of that will create literally hundreds of thousands of jobs. We could use a database of those kind of investments and activities nationwide that would be open and useful to individuals looking for jobs, and could also connect into the sort of data that's collected by the Department of Labor. So this could be a mutual 2 or maybe 3 federal government kind of initiative, but a database that would actually be easy to use and understandable to access in this whole area of the clean energy economy and the vast number of jobs that will be available there would be very useful.
Thanks for that, Dan. And I would tell you, just again, from my own work, I'm seeing tremendous opportunities to connect those large scale employment opportunities with community-based organizations that are trying to figure out where there may be opportunities for those that they serve, including national organizations that are trying to work with their affiliates and connect people to energy jobs. So just validating that I think there's a need for that virtual matchmaking skills to connect the organizations that are working with employment opportunities and where those jobs are.
And I'll just add to the database thing, and something I think about a lot, obviously. I've commented on this on the report that as we think about creating a database of jobs, we need data on the quality of those jobs. And, the current energy workforce report doesn't have very much information, even though they worked with the Department of Labor and used the Census of Employment and Wages. Somehow there's no information about wages in the report. So I think some basic information about the quality of those jobs and how the quality of those jobs changes over time. I think this question that's on the discussion slide about AI AI doesn't change things on its own. How people use AI changes things. And so I think we want to have information about the different way companies use AI and what that means about the quality of jobs in their establishments. And I think there will be things that we would want to see the Department of Energy lift up, where they see really great employment practices by companies that have excellent safety records and have really high quality jobs that engage their workforce, that keep them doing the work that the country needs done. So I think we need more information about the how these things structure employment and the different choice paths companies can take, and how we can sort of encourage companies to take the choice paths that create the best good in the communities in which they're located. So just would put a plug for adding more richness of information about the quality of jobs there.
Thank you, Maureen. Others?
This is Sarita. I've been noodling a little bit on the piece around implications on energy workforce regarding cybersecurity and increasing use of AI. And from where I sit at Ford Foundation, we're working in a lot of different realms of technology and the impact of technology in society. And one of the things that we have been trying to do around in relationship to technology and work is to really pose the question, what would it mean for workforce to be helping in the design of new technologies that then shapes the kinds of that helps inform the types of skill set questions we're asking. And I'm lifting it up mostly because I don't actually know enough about how the Department of Energy thinks about technology in relationship to the workforce. But I wonder if there's a proactive orientation to be taken here that's not just about reacting to some magical AI that's going to happen, when we know that workers often on the front line, the workforce, knows actually what elements of their jobs can, in fact, it would be helpful to have AI engagement in technologies, but be a part of the design. And so I don't have anything concrete yet. I just wanted to share I'm noodling on this. I would love to noodle on it with other people, but I would love for us to explore, is there a proactive role that the department can play in bringing stakeholders together to have that some of those conversations? And we're starting to see it in other sectors, which is partially why I'm raising it in this context, given this is a growing sector of the workforce. But I'll just stop there.
Could I just jump in there and thank you, Sarita, for adding that. I wanted to just say that these questions were posed for the board by the Office of Cybersecurity, Energy Security, and Emergency Response. CSER is the acronym. And so I think it's a really good one for the board to grapple with. Are there any other people who would volunteer to work with Sarita in this topic? And we could have some follow-up calls about it. Missy, Maureen. Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think these are good segues as we begin to think about what our work teams might look like beyond paper one. We've surfaced several areas today that I think might make a natural delineation of where we might focus our attentions separately. So, Sarita, thank you for sharing those musings. Sometimes that's what it takes to really get some other thinking partners, and hopefully through that, we can all come up with some clarity to where we may be able to provide support and leadership, or where the department can. Thank you. Okay. We are right about that time to adjourn the meeting. I would just like to share a quick reflection. I've really enjoyed today's conversation, and I've really seen from this Each of us is coming into the EWAB with our own individual experiences, our areas of expertise, and subject matter expertise. And I really have enjoyed how it's all kind of blending together to make us a strong team and drawing upon those resources that each of us has to offer. I really feel like when we first started, we all came to the table not really sure what we'd signed up for here, but I'm really seeing it come to bat with people that are already having a lot on their plate saying, yes, I'd like to work on this too. And I'd like to do more here because we believe in the charge before us. And I think we're committed to doing all that we can as individuals to form a strong group that can respond to the statutes in front of us, and even more so. So thank you all for your willingness to share those areas of expertise to strengthen our team. It sounds like for next steps, we will see an updated copy of the report coming to us in a couple of days. And then May 6th, I think, oh, look at that. And then May 6th is the date where we can see the official version of draft 2. And we'll have about a week to respond to that. And then I think we are looking at an in-person meeting second week-ish of June, but still more to come as the secretary's schedule is clarified. Any other comments before we adjourn our time together today? Right. Well, thank you all for the engagement, and we look forward to reconnecting again offline through individual conversations and work products, and then again as a group next month. Take care, everyone.
Thanks all. I adjourn.